All right, everyone. Welcome to the welcome to the Stoa. Today we have a very special session. We have Douglas Gillette with us today. Douglas is a mythologist, artist, author, and co-author of the legendary book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, right here. This is actually the 30-year anniversary of the book. So happy that this is the unofficial 30th anniversary party. So the book is about masculine archetypes, and we're going to have a discussion with Douglas today. And how the sessions will work, me and Douglas will have an exchange for about 10, 20 minutes. And if you have questions anytime, put them in the chat. I'll call on you. You can unmute yourself and just ask your question to Douglas. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that and I'll read your question on your behalf. So that being said, Douglas, welcome to the Stoa. And you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Glad to be here.
So I was thinking that maybe the first question, it would be good to get a summary of the book and maybe deep dive into some of the concepts for people who haven't read it. But what inspired you and Robert, the late Robert Moore, to write the book?
It originally was Robert's idea, and he had developed. He'd been part of men's work from the early days on, and he had partially developed a unique, what at the time was a unique system of thought, a map of male psychology, and there was clearly a need that large numbers of men were feeling for a variety of reasons for transformation in the direction of maturity, and feeling a lot of lostness and so forth. I think, following the 50s, 60s, 70s, the feminist movement and so forth, large numbers of men were, I think, and may still be, but feeling a need for a map and guidance for how to be a man in a new world. And so anyway, Robert and I had collaborated and so forth on various things. And he called me one day and he said, Doug, let's write a book. I said, okay, on what? And so he described what he wanted to do. And so we went to work and conceptualizing using his materials. And there was a striking moment as we were beginning to develop the book when I said to him, Bob, I think the shadows of these archetypes are bipolar. I think there's an aggressive side and a passive side. And we just sat there kind of dumbfounded for a few minutes and discovered that really did seem to be true. It really did seem to fit. So we began to put both boyhood and our concept of manhood together and map it out, came up with a pyramidal form, putting the 4 foundational archetypes together. I actually have been doing research in primate ethology and as well as sociology and so forth. And I thought in brain structure, and I thought, I think this stuff is deeply wired in. I think there are many, many archetypes in the Jungian system and many archetypes of masculinity. But I really do think there are these 4 foundational archetypes or pushes, drives, and at least 3 of them are can be seen or can be extrapolated from the limbic system, the old mammal brain. And so anyway, we were inspired to do this as a mission to men, first of all, to help them grow toward maturity, which means a lot of things, but includes firmness with tenderness and compassion. And we saw the difficulty, of course, that men have. Well, everybody really has. Women have these archetypes too, and in somewhat different form, but the difficulty integrating these foundational four drives, universes, whatever.
It might be good to dive deep into some of the concepts, but I was thinking it would to start with, like, what is masculinity? Like, what is the definition or your understanding of masculinity? And then from there, how did you come to those four archetypes?
Oh, Lord. That's several universes there, Peter, that you just opened, I think. But, well, I mean, masculinity is involves several things that come out, are similar to what I would see as femininity, but they come out differently. Fundamentally, and of course, not all men are wired the same way, but in general terms, men, and you can trace this back through anthropology, study of ancient civilizations, and you can see it in our closest living relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos. You can see it to some extent in gorilla society, but men, I think, optimally are wired to provide, protect, defend, promote, and care for those other, women and children. Women too, but if you look at chimpanzee society, for example, there really is a, for most of the males and most of the females, there really are different but overlapping roles. I realize that human beings are much more complex than chimpanzees, and that we, men and women, share a lot more of the roles than do our closest relatives, in the primate relatives. But I still think the underlying push is the same, so that men defend and or expand territory, that psychological territory, social territory, unfortunately, tribal territories of all kinds. But they try to, at their best, they try to hold a secure space. Whereas in femininity, and they're also, I mean, it's stereotypical, but there is some truth in it, I think, that the men tend to be more overtly aggressive. Femininity can be very, and I'm thinking of chimpanzees again, very strong, very ordering, very hierarchical too. But most of the females in chimpanzee societies are more concerned about what's inside the space that is being held by the males. So there is, and I won't say the female chimpanzees are passive exactly. They're not. They're very boisterous and aggressive in their own ways, and they do not always defer to male power or male authority. But there are these differences.
And so the four kind of expressions or archetypes of masculinity, perhaps you can tell us how you tease those out and what they represent.
They it's like we didn't think them, or sit together and sort of artificially create them. They just seem to emerge as self-evident. The warrior, the magician, which involves a lot of things. Magician is probably the most complex, but it has to do with thinking, planning, reflecting, envisioning, and manipulating. The lover, obvious, and then the king. Again, not to be taken literally, in terms of translating that into contemporary society, but the king is the energy that once in a while we can feel, and the queen for women, which correspond roughly to the alpha male in chimpanzee and bonobo society, and the alpha female. These are the optimally, it's not always optimal, but optimally, these are the sort of central figures that organize, often without even speaking. There's a presence of, this is the center, this is that upon which everything else depends. So they, to try to answer your question, these things emerged rather than, we sat down and worked them out. Yeah, when we thought about what is central to masculinity in its many, many expressions and variations, these things just emerged.
And did they emerge in a certain order, like king came first and warrior?
No. Well, if there was any order at all, I would say they just rose up in our conversations from our, I would say our unconscious, and I would, as a Jungian, I would say the collective unconscious of not just humankind, but who knows how big that is. But if there was anything that sort of emerged first, it was probably the king. I know Robert in particular was feeling, along with Robert Bly and others, this lack of, Robert Bly wrote a book, The Sibling Society, and lamenting in not so many words, but basically that we don't have strong leadership, strong and competent leadership. So I would say either the king emerged first, or maybe the warrior, because the warrior, so many men, and I guess I would say Robert too, less than me, but me too. So many men were feeling so wounded in the warrior. But that's, it was an organic process. Somebody asked a question on chat. I have to tell you that I am miserable, even though I teach classes on Zoom of 35, 37 people, usually at a time. I do not do well with chat.
Yeah, when it comes to the Q&A portion, I will call people in, so don't worry about the chat.
Okay.
And when I read the book, I think almost 10 years ago now, the roles resonated deeply, some more than others, in some different context. And so for people who haven't read the book or know of the 4 archetypes, perhaps you can go through each and say what they represent.
Okay, I can do the archetypes briefly, what we call in their fullness. And let me preface that by saying that we did a chapter in the book on the childhood forms of these, and then which get ideally mature and turn into the adult archetypes in their fullness as individual men can access them. But they certainly are prefigured in childhood too. So I'll start with the king in childhood. We call it the divine child. There's the sense in which, in its fullness, not talking about the shadow forms right now, but the sense of being of the child's being central, being well, there's creativity, there's neat play, which begins to order things. There's language learning, which also orders things. There, all of that, the divine child, and a sense too in childhood of optimal childhoods, but even just good enough childhoods of a sense of magic and wonder and fullness and opening, being open, imagination, and so forth. That in adulthood optimally becomes the king. And by the way, the only way to, I'll say the only way to achieve something resembling maturity in any of this, psychologically, spiritually, is to keep your child alive, your inner child alive and flourishing, and always, because he, in this case, she is the motivator for everything that we become, particularly and optimally as we become more mature. The childhood form of the magician we called the precocious child, and this again picks up on the energies of imagination, of creativity, of curiosity and learning, which translates eventually, ideally, into the adult magician. Not in the sense of doing, magic in that way, but becomes eventually not only a vessel of knowledge, but also of wisdom, of deep, seeing things deeply, x-raying things beneath the surface. There's much more to it than that. The childhood version of the lover, we decided that for men, the archetype that seemed most instinctual was what Freud called the Oedipal child. Boys who are in love with their mothers and powerfully influenced by their mothers, their fathers too, but negatively, positively, and everything in between. The Oedipal child in men, boys, has the potential to lead to a very rich form of the adult lover, who has gotten free of the mother as the dominator, and yet who turns back to the feminine. And that's a complicated story, how boys have to break with their mothers, yet ideally keep feminine qualities as part of their maleness. It's the mixture of male and female qualities, or masculine, feminine, in the adult male lover that makes the lover rich and full and fully expressive. the warrior in its fullness in the childhood version, we called the hero, meaning every boy that has a chance to feel this way wants to be a hero, wants to show what he can do, uh, wants to impress, of course, his parents, but also other boys and girls and so forth. Strangely, perhaps, it is the death of heroic consciousness in late boyhood, adolescence, that allows the budding man to become a mature warrior. So now, do you want me to go into more detail about the adult versions?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay. Now I'm going to take them in a little different order. We did the childhood chapter, by the way, in a different order in going through the archetypes than we did the adult versions. That's because we thought that the hero, as the boyhood form of the warrior, was really the last and most clearly defined step from boyhood to manhood, the death of heroic consciousness. But anyway, in the adult, started with the king. The king is the impulse to, of course, lead, organize, provide safety, protection, and also fertility. Fertility meaning a fertile, creative mind and heart that looks with strength and compassion at the world, and who has the archetypes of the magician and the warrior and the lover integrated in that mature archetype. I'm way oversimplifying here, but I guess we have to do that. Second in line was the warrior. The warrior in its fullness in the adult male is loyal to kingship. In other words, loyal to the highest and best and most core and central vision, and fights for it, defends, all in distress, helps the king set parameters. The warrior is very much involved in boundary issues, which a lot of us struggle with. How to set boundaries. This is me, this is not me, without being too rigid on the one hand, or without having the boundaries be too porous on the other hand, so that we're subject to a lot of invasion psychologically by others, but also by the others within, and so forth. Anyway, the warrior is the protector, defender, and in a certain sense, the promoter too. So that entrepreneurs, for example, just take one example, often have a lot of warrior energy. Okay, the magician I described a little bit earlier is the most complicated one of all of the four, because it involves so many things. It involves knowledge, fields and fields of knowledge, or just, or a specialty that is really fully and deeply and intricately developed. The magician is also the keeper of, ideally, not just of knowledge, as I said, but of wisdom too, and insight. The magician energy or archetype gives us the capacity to see, to X-ray what is going on. And it also involves, if you can see what's going on beneath the surface, then you have a much better chance of not only understanding yourself and what's beneath the surface in you, but what's beneath the surface in other people. And ideally, again, to help them and support them and guide them in the shadow form, which I don't know if we'll get to or not. One of the shadow forms, the magician manipulates, but in his fullness, he becomes a guide. And there are many ways to do that. And then, of course, the lover in his fullness in adult males is this combination of strength and tenderness, firmness and tenderness. As we all know, we don't have to open this universe, but one of a galaxy of problems that couples have is from the male side, that the male, well, and I say both, have difficulty with boundaries. If the magician is strong, but not slipped over into its shadow side, then the lover will be firm but loving. That's the best I can do in 25 words or less.
Yeah, that was a great summary. And if anyone has the book, maybe I'll scan this. There's on page 17, they have a really good diagram of all the different combinations you can get. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. Anything that Douglas said, we can kind of expand upon, or if you have a question in a different area, feel free to ask it as well. I'll tag in the man who introduced me to King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, David, my good friend David Gosley. David, you had a question for Douglas?
Thank you, Peter. It's really great to be here with you, Peter, and Douglas, and everybody else. So I preface my question by talking about when non-specialists are thinking about using these ideas, using these archetypes in their lives, they might fall into certain misunderstandings, kind of mishandle these ideas of archetypes. And I'm reminded of the image of Don Quixote, who really regressed into archetypal images so deeply that he lost contact with reality.
Yeah.
And something similar might happen with misunderstandings of these archetypes. I might start thinking that the end point of my life is to be a magician. And that's the end, as opposed to kind of carry this image of a magician as one reference point and still remain in exchange with reality. So my understanding of Jung is that what is important for individuation is not these archetypes that are coming to us from the past, but also an ongoing exchange with reality. So I'm curious to hear about your thoughts on these types of misunderstandings and what else you have encountered.
Okay, let me start by saying that in my view, well, several things. In my view, we never want to be an archetype. In a certain sense, these things are subhuman, as is all of the rest of reality that we know of. They're subpersonal, and so you do not want to become possessed by that which is subpersonal. And so that's one thing. I think reality is, I know what you mean by reality. You mean being a person here and now. Yeah. Yeah, we try to be clear, and we try to make it clearer in the other 4 books, the Within books, the King Within, the Warrior Within, etc. That how to access the energies and balance them that are coming up from whatever level of reality that is, and to enrich, augment, but not to become possessed by the unconscious, to augment the person that we are becoming. So I think that's part of what you were saying. I'm forgetting some of the rest of it.
No, that's good. I think that's an important note to keep in mind. I would agree that there's a danger of being possessed.
There is.
It's inviting. It's like a gravitational pull that,
Mhm.
you know, like the earth exerts this gravitational pull, and I might just fall on this big mass and just rest there. It's very stable.
Yeah, yes. Jung warned against that too. There is a sort of, there can be a sort of, for example, a sort of horrid fascination with the darkness, with the shadow side of things, and with the shadow side of these archetypes. Whenever we encounter, I mean, I will say, whenever I have encountered something which is larger than me, larger but not necessarily, but may still be sub me, I feel a kind of fascination for it. I want to see what's there. I want to see what, but I want to also keep my distance from it, because no human person can get too close to any, I would say, you could say superhuman, but I would still label it as subhuman aspect of reality and survive. Yeah, people, I mean, this is not just true in psychology with archetypes. It's also true of people who, for example, study cosmology or quantum physics, or really dive deep into math, higher math and so forth, and try to see what's there. And they can reach a point where they disappear, they get swallowed into it, and of course that is psychosis. So you got to be careful with the big stuff.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, David. Jessica, you got a question?
Yes, thanks so much. And I guess the first part of my question is like, what do you mean by sub and super? Is it below conscious awareness? And then the main question that I typed into the chat was what your sense is of how human beings interact with the archetypes. Is it through our brains, our bodies, our chakras, relationships, that sort of thing?
Okay. What was the first part of your question?
It was about, because you were mentioning sub and super.
Oh, yeah. There's so many ways to approach that. In a certain sense, if you look, for example, at F.W.H. Myers studies, late 19th century, early 20th century of the psyche, he used the terms sub and super almost interchangeably at times. I mean, in a sense, they're the same thing, sort of, in the sense that they're a lot bigger than we are. But he and subsequent psychologists and so forth did also divide them. Super meaning more of a person than I am, sub meaning less of a person than I am, less of the I, you know, the I identity, Descartes and all that. So that I've come in my own life to value most highly of all the things I've studied and all the things I've been exposed to and presences that I have felt. I value most highly human persons. Well, not just human, other creatures which also exhibit personhood. For example, yes, I can be wowed by the uncountable so far and maybe forever billions of galaxies in the universe and the billions of stars in each one, and that seems like so much more than I am. And yet it isn't. It's big, but it's also dumb, and it doesn't have personhood. And so that's, yeah, sorry, but that's a partial answer to the first part of your question I would give off the top of my head. And the second part was?
It was just what your senses of how we interact with archetypes, like how does it happen in our brain or in our bodies, or
where are they?
yeah.
Okay, that oh wow. Well, I basically take, I should say I'm fundamentally a Neoplatonist, and or more broadly a Platonist. I don't think there is a where. I mean, I don't think there's a place ultimately. At the same time, I'll take William James's understanding, early American psychologist. His understanding was that the brain, clearly there's a relationship between personhood and all the levels and aspects of that, archetypes, collective unconscious, et cetera, and the brain. My take is that the brain, it enables psyche to incarnate or to be present in the realm that we know as matter, energy, whatever. I don't believe that the brain is the source. I mean, it will look like the source if you're coming from the materialist side of things. Of course, it will look like the source. I don't, but I think it's the other way around. I think psyche builds what we call material reality for its own uses.
Great. Thank you so much for answering those big questions. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot more, of course. I mean, this is great. You guys are opening whole worlds here.
We've got a juicy question from Aaron. Aaron, if you can ask your question.
Here I am.
There you are.
Hi, Douglas. Thanks for doing this. My question is, in our modern Western culture, which archetype do you think has fallen most into shadow, and why?
Oh, well, all of the above. I think we've had, I'll try to answer that more specifically in a second. I think clearly, to me, a lot of our leadership in any walk of life that you want to think of is shadow king. There's so much tyrant that has been expressed and continues to be expressed. I'm sorry to say, it looks to me like there's more and more of that. It looks to me that kingship is falling deeper and deeper into shadow, whether it's at the corporate level or your local school board or government or internationally. So you know, also it looks to me like the warrior, which is always in danger of shadow manifestations too, coming up with the king. I mean, there's this dark pall, as I see it, of misdirected, misspent warrior energy just all over the place. How are these things getting away with that? The shadows of the king and the warrior getting away with the havoc they're creating? Because the magician also potentials are falling into shadow. The wisdom is not there. The moderation, the mature envisioning, not just of our human societies, but of the planet, et cetera, et cetera. It is the magician that would empower us, for example, to actually do something about global warming. I mean, and so where's the magician? Well, you have these speakers here and there, but because the leadership and the leaders' henchmen have fallen into shadow, the magician in its wisdom is not being heard. So, and also, if you think of the shadow magician as the trickster, as the manipulator, that is just all over the place. And I don't want to single out a single entity, country, anything like that. But I don't know if you saw the documentary recently on the origins of COVID-19 in China, and the way, absolutely predictably, as our government would do too, so I'm not singling out the Chinese, obfuscated and hid information from their own people, but also the rest of the world, did not deliver, vital. That's shadow magician stuff in the service, the misdirected service of shadow king and warrior. But again, I don't mean it's just the Chinese; it's everywhere. So to get to your question, I would say the most wounded and damaged that has the most effect on persons, and maybe is the beginning of the fall of all these other dominoes, is the wounded warrior. I mean, the wounded lover. If we hadn't been so wounded in our love for ourselves and then for each other, none of this would be taking place. Our love for our fellow creatures, our love for the planet, so I guess I would say, yeah, the lover, the mature lover is the most eclipsed of all of them, and is the origin of these others becoming so dysfunctional. I don't know, but that's how it seems to me.
Any follow-up question or share, Aaron?
I guess it sounds to me like maybe you think that things are falling further and further into shadow as time goes on. Is that your perception?
I'm not sure about that. People, in my classes and so forth, think I'm a pessimist. Some people do, although after 18 years of teaching those classes, I'm finding that many more people of my students are pessimistic too. So I no longer stick out quite like a sore thumb anymore. I think humankind is humankind, and we're stuck with ourselves. We are primates, and we exhibit the whole suite of primate behavior. So that all of that is predictable, and that's how we are, and that's how we're going to be. Do we make progress in certain respects? We do at times. And I, for example, am very happy to be in the 21st century. As much as I love ancient Egypt, I don't want to live there, So I do think there is progress, and it isn't just gadgets. We're very good with gadgets and not so good with much else. But I do recognize that we have, in parts of the world here and there, in certain epochs, we have achieved and are achieving greater mutual respect, mutual sensitivity to each other, but at the same time, as C.S. Lewis said, we live in the shadowlands, and that's just how it is, and that's us. So that there's always a mixture of light and darkness, and I do think, as just me, I do think that we can push and pull and reconfigure light and darkness, but I don't think we reduce the darkness. And in this particular, because it's us, as well as the whole of nature, I would like to believe that someday, not on rocket ships, although I really admire they're great machines. I mean, I really love that. But space is not going to be our salvation. We're the only ones that can be our salvation. And we can, right here and now, we can grow and nurture those parts of the suite of behaviors that primate behaviors that we have, to increase the light for a while, in certain times and places. I'm not sure, Aaron, whether we're falling into greater and greater darkness, or I guess I would say I think we are. I think it's temporary. I think we do have this resilience, but when it will come, how it will come, I don't know. But I think so. You know, we are.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. So we might have time for one or two more questions. Haslam, you had a question.
Thank you, Douglas. Really deep thoughts. I was wondering, since you've written the book, if you've had chances to deep dive into feminine perspective and in the interplay and the dynamics between the two. And I'm sure you've probably had lots of discussions with others who might have perhaps studied the heroine side and how they interact and how it could possibly heal all these woundedness.
Yeah. Yeah. I have, in fact, Jean Shinoda Bolen, her book Goddesses in Every Woman, was in a certain way, it was an entree for Robert and me. I mean, we did things differently from the way she does them, but her look at the different archetypal potentials in women really helped clarify our thinking too. And I will say, in my raising, well, no, it's much more than this, but raising our daughter, who has I was never not a feminist, but raising my daughter in a decaying society with less and less civility and so forth, and helping her to become fuller, to integrate her own warrior and her magician and her lover. Well, I mean, it just really showed me that women are struggling with the same things that men are in terms of our archetypal potentials and so forth. And you know, I've said in the past, and for example, in my book Primal Love, I emphasize the differences between the male and the female, masculine and feminine. Not that you can equate masculine with male or feminine with female, but I certainly have come to see that as women have become more and more empowered, at least here in the Western world, they, and to some degree in the Far East especially too, and to some degree in South Asia and so on, they could bring a gentler, more humane touch I'm hopeful that they can. And at the same time, I'm not sure that that follows naturally. In some ways, especially if you look at primate behavior, which lies behind ours, you don't really see. Okay, so the guys are more overtly aggressive. The females in chimpanzee society, for example, can be very aggressive, but aggression isn't the only way of expressing hostility or self-affirmation. There are a lot of ways to be passive aggressive or to subtly undermine or to, so I guess I would say I hope for a better world as more and more women become empowered. But whereas in the past I did say, we may be the same species, but just barely, men and women. Now I would say, no, we really are the same species with different tonal, stuff, but we really are the same species. We're so not as hopeful about that as I was. And I do see, I think we all see, while women are becoming empowered in certain places, we have an example right before our eyes right now in a country that we tried to socially engineer, didn't try long enough, but women are going to be disastrously disempowered, even more than they were before. So I don't know I don't know. I hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Any follow-up thought or share, Özlem?
Thank you. Actually, you've somewhat answered my following question in terms of how that played out in your life by giving the example for your daughter. But I just, it's interesting that I'm just thinking perhaps you're imagining or envisioning her to be a queen in this world.
I would like to imagine that, yes. And she as she matures, she's going to be 25, so that's not very mature. It's impossible, but she does. I mean, if she can glue it all together, and integrate the archetypes and with her character and so forth, I would say she is a budding queen. Yeah, she's budding, and that's my hope.
Thanks, Özlem. So approaching top of the hour, perhaps we can close with some final thoughts from you, Douglas, about the book 30 years later, and the impact it's had on many people. We were talking before we pressed record about so much people are still geeking out about this book in many places, niche places on the internet. So any kind of thoughts or reflections on that, the book's impact 30 years later?
Well, needless to say, I'm extremely pleased that after 30 years, it's still number 8 in gender studies. And you go to the gender studies sections of bookstores and so forth, it still sells, still number 8, which means to me that a lot of people are still finding it relevant and moving and insightful, and that is just that's just great. It's a great feeling that we created something that continues to resonate, dated in some ways maybe, but fundamentally not. Not only that, but it's surprisingly, wonderfully surprisingly, we keep selling foreign rights. I mean, it's in all major languages, almost all major languages now, except French. And someone needs to talk to French publishers and get them to uh, come to the realization. I know it may be difficult for them, but that there are things of worth written in English, which could be. But anyway, I'm not complaining. I'm just okay. So a couple of years ago, we sold the rights in Chinese, and last year we sold the rights in Arabic. So that was really exciting to me. But I mean, it's in German, it's in Portuguese, Spanish, it's in Czech, it's in, so I couldn't be happier with feeling like Robert and I made a contribution that really can inspire, hopefully is inspiring men and women all over the world in a lot of different cultures and societies. That's just, who gets to do that? That's wonderful. So I can leave the world. I don't want to leave the day after tomorrow, but I can leave the world feeling like I left something of value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the book has offered great value in my life. I know many other people's life. So gratitude to you, Douglas, for coming today to the Stoa and writing the book. Love to have you back. Any final words you'd like to leave us with?
I saw a question about saw a question about my email address. If you want to write that down, I can. I don't know who it was from, but I can certainly give it to you. It's lowercase GILLETTED for Douglas at sbcglobal.net. I see Aaron has a hand up. Are we out of time?
Aaron doesn't have his hand up, I don't think.
I see a hand over there. Okay.
Yeah.
Final thoughts.
Final thoughts.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed interacting with you guys, and it's been wonderful. I think the Stoa is just a fantastic idea. This is my first experience of it, and I just would say blessings and on your journeys. And okay, one final thought. The progress that we can make, in my view, toward the most worthwhile progress that human beings can make, in my view, is to become more humane with ourselves and with everyone and everything else. Sometimes humaneness involves drawing lines and borders, and if everybody's not on that same page, which we have to defend humaneness. I would say ultimately, though, salvation, well-being, is not on the horizontal of history. Ultimately, it's vertical for each one of us, however you conceive of that. And that's all I would say for now.
Good parting words. And then Sam in the chat, let us go forth and soothe our wounded lovers. Amen to that. So feel free to, definitely pick up the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. And next session at the Stoa is actually today at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Susan Campbell, the godmother of the authentic relating movement, is coming in for a book launch, From Triggered to Tranquil. So that being said, Douglas, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Hope to see you later.